How's it going, Eliminators? Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to easily fix a leaking oil drain tube on a John Deere riding lawnmower. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So today in the shop I have this John Deere LA130 that came in for some annual service, oil change, filters, spark plugs, and it needed a deck belt as well. But in today's video I'm going to be showing you guys how to easily fix a leaking drain tube on the Briggs and Stratton V-Twin engine. And what's very common on these riding mower engines here is the pipe becomes loose inside of the threads in the engine there. And you guys can see there's grass and debris stuck all over the side of this machine, both on the engine and the frame. So this is a telltale sign that this has a very slow oil leak coming out of here, because as the oil leaks out, then it kind of sprays all around this area. All your grass and debris sticks to that. Now, on the end of this tube here, it is slightly larger than the plastic, so we can actually use a socket to see exactly how loose this is. Sometimes they're so loose you can grab them with your hand and move it around. But the one thing that I wanted to show you guys was that John Deere, unlike a lot of other manufacturers, was smart enough to make this tube just long enough to the point where that hex head just passes the frame. And it actually gives you just enough room here to take a 15/16 socket, and you can slip it over top of the plastic tube here, and then we're going to lock that on right there. So it's locked on now, and I'll try to get a shot of this. As I turn the socket, you guys are going to notice that the tube is in fact turning. So today I'm going to show you guys how to fix this leak without having to remove the tube. Because what happens, and this is very common, is when you guys go to drain the oil and then you remove the filter and you get this thing as dry as you can, no matter what, whenever you go to remove this tube, oil will keep coming out and it will keep seeping out very slowly, to the point where you would almost want to jack up the right side of the riding mower under the wheels there. And because the engine would now be on an angle, less oil would be leaking. But I have a way that's much easier, and it only requires loosening this tube. It doesn't require completely removing it, which means there's not going to be a bunch of oil all over the place. So first things first, we're going to pressure wash this whole area here. So when we're working in this area, we don't have to worry about a whole bunch of dirt and debris falling onto our threads. Now that I have everything cleaned up, I'm going to run the engine to heat up the oil, and I'll get the oil drained and I'll get the oil filter changed, but I will not put fresh oil in the engine yet because we're going to do the little leaking tube fix first. I've zip tied the fuel line up out of the way just for now. So you guys can see this is the plastic cap here, and then there is a rubber O-ring that makes it seal. Now all you have to do is twist this to the point where the groove lines up to that little nub there, and then pull it straight off. But before we do that, it's always a good habit to remove the key from the ignition switch, just so that you don't have to worry about starting up an engine with no oil in it. Now these can be a little bit difficult to remove, but that is how you drain the oil on these. And opening up the dipstick right there allows air to go in as the oil comes out, so it makes it draining a little bit easier. Okay, so I'll let the rest of the oil drain out of the engine. As soon as it stops dripping out, I'm going to remove and replace the oil filter with a Stenz 120-485. So this right here is what I'm talking about, guys. That will do that for hours, especially if you remove the tube. So I'm going to cap that off, and I'll remove and change the filter. All right, guys, so the oil has been drained and the filter has been changed. I didn't put any fresh oil in the engine because I want the least amount of oil possible. All right, so I've already showed you guys the 15/16 socket slips right over the black plastic drain cap. You don't have to worry about that breaking or anything. And then this thing's already loose, so I don't really need the Milwaukee, but what we're gonna do is just bump this thing loose just until I can work it by hand So you guys can see now that I'm going to start unthreading it very, very slowly. And what we're gonna feel for is the ability for me to kind of rock this pipe back and forth. The farther I can rock it back and forth means the farther the threads are to the point at which this whole pipe comes out. We don't want to remove the pipe completely. So all we want to do really is loosen the pipe until there's maybe 1 or 2 threads left inside of the engine block. And you guys are gonna see we're getting pretty close to that point. Pretty close. And once again, guys, if you completely remove that pipe, what a mess it's gonna make. You can see right now that there's no oil coming out, even though the tube is starting to get to the point where it's pretty loose. So that's important. And we can also see the remnants of the old thread locker here. And we'd be able to almost chip that off, but don't worry, you're not gonna have to do that. We can now move on to the next step. Just so you guys can see, if I back this up any farther, you can actually see a little bit of oil. So we're gonna thread it in maybe 1/8 more of a turn, and then I'm gonna get my air compressor. Take your air compressor and then blow around the thread. And you might be able to see a little bit of oil being forced out. And then what we're gonna do is move over to the red thread locker. It doesn't matter what brand you use. I'm using some Permatex. You wanna make sure that it is red because you shouldn't ever have to remove this pipe. You can replace the O-ring and the cap on the ends of these. So for the most part, the actual pipe itself can always stay inside of the engine. But now that you guys have the threads blown off with air, you can use your red thread locker and put quite a bit on there, guys. You don't have to worry about using too much. And then what we're going to do is we're going to thread this clockwise in, and we're going to go 180 degrees to the point where you guys can see there's no thread locker because that was the bottom side. And then we're going to put the red thread locker onto those threads there. Once again, don't worry if you use too much. We can always wipe this up. And then at this point, guys, you guessed it, we're just gonna tighten this thing up. At this point, make sure your Milwaukee impact is into the tighten mode. We're gonna lock that on, just like that, and then we're gonna tighten it up, being careful not to strip the threads. That's pretty much it, guys. I don't want to go too much. And because we drained and changed the oil before we did the red thread locker, we can now let this engine sit for approximately 24 hours because that's what the Permatex Red Thread Locker says in order for it to cure properly. And we can see that using the socket over top of the plastic drain part there, we turn that and it's no longer loose, guys, so you don't have to worry about that coming loose. Just let this red thread locker cure, and that's it. You've successfully fixed a leaking drain tube without having to remove it and make a mess. Now, when this machine came in, the oil was right above the add line there, and I did service this back in June of 2022. That's about 1 year and 1 month ago, so the pipe has recently come loose over, the end of last season or the beginning of this season. And just to show you guys, I am using some Castrol GTX 10W40 because the 40 provides a little thicker of an oil on the hot side when the engine is at operating temperature. And I find for a lot of these older Briggs and Stratton or Kohler engines, I like to use the 10W40 just because it doesn't consume as much. You guys can see I do have the old invoice here. We do oil filter, and this engine took 78 ounces of 10W40. Now, apart from removing the key, I also like to use these no oil tags that I hang off of the steering wheel right next to the key switch there. That just lets me know that there is no oil in the engine. So in case you wanted to let this thing sit dry without any oil in it for that 24-hour period, you could do that, but I've noticed that it really doesn't make a difference. I am using the 10W40 oil inside of this 530 container here, and I'm gonna go ahead and just add up this oil, and then I can put this machine off to the side and work on the deck. And I also like to use a paint stick to mark both the month and the year that I did this service on. You could also write the hours down on the oil filter if you want to, but I generally record that information on the invoice. All right, so I just double checked the oil after running it. You guys can see it's just over the full line. Not a big deal on these big V-Twin Briggs engines. That'll be just fine. Also guys, I don't think I've ever filmed this, but I purchased a global industrial fan. It's an I-beam mount. You guys can see it back there. Not sure how that picks up on the audio of the camera, but wow, this thing's oscillating. Moves on its own. One of the best things we've purchased. Well, that's going to be it for today's video. Just a quick one, but simple enough. You don't have to remove that oil drain tube completely. You don't have to worry about making a huge mess like I showed you in the video. Just back it off far enough so that you can get some red thread locker on there and then tighten it back up. But with that being said, if you guys enjoyed today's video, think about leaving me a thumbs up. You know, it really helps me out. You can click here to subscribe and click over here to watch one of my previous videos. I upload every single week, so be sure to stop on by next week, check channel out for new content. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.